Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Octant community meeting. Today is June 24th, 2020. And per usual, we got a bunch of things on the agenda, and I'll be sharing my screen so you all can follow along.
All right, thanks, Jonas. So there's, as you can see on the agenda, there's a few things that I want to talk about today. Josh, are you if you are short on time, I can talk about the plugin stuff first.
That would actually be appreciated.
Yeah, cool. So I'll just rearrange that real quick. So the current situation with plugins is that they work, but they're not great. And kind of the reason is there's a few problems there, and Josh, feel free to add anything that I might have missed. But the binary has to be built for each platform and then distributed out. There's no hot reloading of plugins, so if you make an update or change or want to install a new one, it doesn't do that right now. You have to stop Octant. There's also no runtime discovery or registration of plugins. So when a user does put a plugin, maybe they don't have it already, there's no way to do that. And then currently the dashboard client is namespaced to the current active namespace. So there's no easy way to get at cluster level, like do cluster level queries and get to cluster resources, even if the person running Octant has permissions to do that. So some of the ideas that we are thinking about doing with plugins is, so the first idea to kind of solve this no hot reloading and no runtime discovery and registration is to actually make the plugin gRPC interface a public interface. Right now, it's currently controlled by Go plugin, and it's an internal interface that gets created and established between Octant and the plugin, with Octant kind of being the plugin manager and launching that plugin at runtime. The idea here is that Octant would still be able to facilitate that process, but the actual gRPC interface itself would be publicly exposed alongside Octant's existing like API v1 endpoint. So plugins could, in theory, just run anywhere that can talk to the Octant instance. There would be no requirement that they would be on the local machine even. So that's idea number one. Moving through to idea number two is that local plugins would be TypeScript based, and those would just be able to be distributed to all platforms because they would just be in TypeScript. And again, there would still be Octant management around these. So you could just drop in your TypeScript file and Octant would create and establish all of the necessary gRPC things to facilitate it communicating with Octant over that same public gRPC interface. But you wouldn't have to build your plugin for every single platform. And also plugins would be able to take advantage of the fact that all of the Octant components already have a TypeScript version of themselves. So right now there's all of the Go components that get marshaled out to TypeScript. And if local plugins are set up to be TypeScript by default, they would be able to just use those things directly. And then the third idea is to provide what we have now, which is the dashboard client, but kind of call it something new, maybe namespaced client or something to that. But then also provide a cluster level client that allows things like querying the cluster for RBAC stuff and node information and things that you can't really query using the namespace client for. Right now, to do kind of that type of thing, you have to create your full like client from config, kubeconfig, and do a bunch of stuff. So we want to enable plugins to be able to take advantage of the fact that Octant will manage all of the client for you, and it will create the client. It will give you the right client depending on the user, and it will pass those to you so that you can execute queries against the cluster. We want to really strengthen that interface and make it so that plugins don't need to go out and create their own clients to get things done. And so that's kind of the high level of some ideas we're floating around with plugins. And Josh, for folks who don't know, is the maintainer and was the author of the Helm plugin for Octant, which actually turned out to be a very popular plugin that people use. We see a lot of folks using it. So I invited him here to kind of get a pulse on his feelings and just his input on plugin stuff.
No, I appreciate you reaching out to, to talk about this stuff. So I will say, like, part of what was very attractive to me about developing on Octant was that you could write these plugins using Go versus like a TypeScript type thing, and that the entire front end itself was essentially able to be developed using the Go language. And I get that, I think for the end user, they don't care so much, but as the actual developer, like, it's just an enjoyable experience. So I didn't find it, dreadfully painful to distribute the binaries for these on different platforms. So I know that's the first thing you have in the problems bullet, like, but I get how for an end user that might be challenging unless Octant had some sort of package management solution built in. The hot reloading, I think that's an interesting that's an interesting topic. Like, I had put together, and I know, like, Wayne and Sam, like, I shared like a script I had that did hot reloading just in Bash, but I think that that's something that'd be cool to be built into Octant as well. But I don't think that that really requires changes to the way that you're doing plugins. The issue that I think I was having, the only issue I've really had on my end in maintaining the Helm client was an issue that we talked about several months ago on one of these calls, and that was, how do I make a write operation against Helm releases? So I basically want to put a button for people to be able to delete their Helm releases, and I didn't find any way to do that, and it led to a discussion about exposing the cube context, which I think, and I know Brian Lyles was involved in that conversation as well, like, that it probably is a security thing not to do that. But, like, other than that, like, a lot of these things aren't, I don't know what you guys may have been discussing this previously, but I haven't really experienced a lot of these bullets as huge problems for me. It's more about the exposing, like, write access and unnamespaced calls. So maybe the gRPC interface thing would be something that helps with that. But honestly, like, I'm going to write the thing in Go anyway, and I kind of like the way it already works. So that's all I have to add.
No, that's great. That's excellent. Yeah, so I think that the public gRPC interface is really just taking the existing gRPC interface, which you write a plugin to now in Go, and exposing it publicly so that you could still write your plugin in Go, but then also it makes it easier for everyone to write their plugin in whatever language they want.
Sure.
So like in this instance, the Helm plugin, right? The only thing that would change for the Helm plugin would be probably the main call where you call serve, right? Like like instead of calling that internal serve that Go plugin has, it would likely be some serve or expose or register thing that Octant has, right? And that would be like the main difference there. So yeah, okay. No, that's great. That's great feedback. I like to. So these problems were from some other plugins, like there was a Tecton plugin that folks are working on that they opened some issues against the Octant repo. There was the Atrina plugin, and there was the Aqua Security plugin and your plugin. All of those are like the most popular Octant, like the largest Octant plugins and the most popular ones. And so that's where this list was kind of compiled from. And the dashboard client is namespaced one on 18 was the one that I extracted from your issue around. There was no good way to get at like cluster level calls.
Yeah, and I think it's less about the namespacedness,
Okay.
and it's more, if I recall correctly, I'm looking at the source code for the Helm plugin right now, and I'm not passing any namespaces in. I can grab a link here. Here, I'll show you an example of a call I'm doing to list secrets that represent Helm releases. Here, I can throw that in HackMD too.
You want to share your screen?
No, I'll just.
Yeah, I'll put it in there.
It's trying to make me sign in. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's the link. Yeah, so you can see like this is, I'm listing, so Helm releases are stored in secrets with a specific, like you see it as selector owner Helm.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that that was listing across namespaces last time I checked.
Okay.
Obviously, like I know Octant has that drop down of namespaces, and it would be helpful because in Helm 3 you can actually segregate releases by namespace. So that would actually be helpful to have NamespacedClient. I think what the issue is, like if you go to the queue, the issue queue for this plugin, like the one issue I opened was I want a button to delete releases, and then it would also be nice to maybe like, you know, I don't know. I know it's not really, I know Octant is all about like visibility and less about like making edits and changes to your cluster. So maybe we just drop that concept, but having any type of write access. So I have client.list and maybe there's a client.get, but is there a client.delete, for example?
Got it. Yeah. So they're actually, we have been adding more and more edit capability into Octant in the last couple releases. So this being able to have a delete button for releases definitely falls in line with something that we would expect Octant to be able to do, especially for local developers and people who are just trying to develop Helm charts for their software, right? Being able to delete your releases that you're creating and testing out locally would be a very convenient thing to be able to do. So that's good. That's good information.
Yeah, and I think I'm now remembering. I think beyond that, the issue with the cube context was so with Helm, like when you create a release, it creates X number of other things in the cluster that are related to it. So like the other issue I had is I wanted to like visualize the layout similar to how you're doing with like deployments, for example. But anyway, no, but basically Helm has a public method to delete a release.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be extremely simple for me to, if I had the name of the release and access to the cube context that Octant has, to just call helm.delete release name. Without access to that, what I'm required to do is recreate the logic in Helm to delete call using Octant's get and list and delete methods on the client. So that was, I think, another issue I had is how do you integrate with tools that are simply built on top of Kubernetes client Go.
Right. Okay. Yep.
That was, I think, the other big issue. But it sounds like if you do have delete calls, I could make this, we could make the delete button work some way, somehow. So I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. So we have deletes internally to Octant. The Dash client does not currently expose delete, but that's something that we can, it just hasn't been piped through.
Sure.
So that is something that we would be able to pipe through to the public interface, so that, because right now I think we have list, get, update, and create. And create was the most recent one we added. So extending that to support delete would not be a hard thing now that we support it on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, write actions would be great too. Like if I could add like a rollback button for Helm releases, or I would hate to like, yeah, I don't know. I would hate to rewrite or just copy code from Helm to do these things. So I don't know the right answer for that, but I do believe strongly in like the way that y'all are building these APIs for Octant, and like, you know, don't let the plugin developer do bad things. Like it basically puts you in a box that you need to stay in, and I actually really appreciate that. So yeah, but
Awesome.
I don't know. Keep it up. It's awesome. I love Octant.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the other thing, I'll toss a link in here. So we extended. This is relevant to what you're talking about. We extended the ability to add custom actions, and documented an example of doing that for plugins. Obviously, we'll still have to add the delete call to the public interface, but this would allow you to create custom buttons within your plugin that would perform actions.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm interested, you know, I don't want to take up way too much more time, but I'm interested who was, or what was the feedback in terms of wanting to use TypeScript?
So that was so there was feedback that building a binary for each platform was annoying.
Got it.
And so our solution was, well, let's find a agnostic, like a platform agnostic language that would work, that didn't require, that had good internal support within Golang. So we could load up a full runtime for that inside the Go language, and didn't require external tooling on top of anything to run that code. And
Yeah.
we evaluated Python and Starlark and some other things, and TypeScript or JavaScript was the one that ended up being the best candidate for having a full runtime inside Go, so we could consume the TypeScript files and then load them into the plugin manager.
Yeah, I don't really have any comments on that. I mean, is using like containers a non-starter?
It's not. Yes. Yeah.
It makes sense.
It is. And mainly because as we start to go, there's using a separate container for a plugin as we start to go for in-cluster deployments as well, is like, then you have Octant plus all of its plugin containers.
Yeah,
and then,
I get it.
Yeah, so it just becomes a... another part of the motivation behind making the gRPC interface just public is that when Octant ends up in cluster, it solves the current issue of what do you do about plugins, because right now they are global processes that are launched by Octant.
Right. Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe like, could I still develop my plugin in Go and then export it as a TypeScript gRPC talker? I don't know. Like, I wouldn't want to think about, I wouldn't want to write the TypeScript myself, but if you could develop the plugin as you're already doing, and then you can maybe have like things that convert from Go or from Rust or whatever thing that talks gRPC into a more distributable thing, that could be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I think the goal is to make sure that the writing of the plugin to satisfy the public gRPC interface would be as like as you do it now in Go, would be as equally straightforward, and would just result in essentially a different serving call, because we don't want,
Mm-hmm.
again, like we don't want people who enjoy the current plugin experience because you can just write plain Go. You don't have to think about JavaScript or TypeScript. You don't have to think about HTML or UI. The components you get are the components you render, and if you like, that's it, right? It makes a lot of choices for you, and that's intentional, and we want to keep that feel, because we know that is what attracted a lot of people to write plugins for Octant.
Yeah, I'm totally on that page. So, yeah, I would hate to see it go away from ability to be done in Go. It's a matter of, I think, for your team to figure out how to better distribute these things. And maybe I'll have some thoughts after the call, and I'll reach out to y'all.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, keep me posted. This is interesting stuff.
Yeah, will do, and I'll be sure to. I'm watching that. I realized I'm already watching that add button to delete a release issue. I'll be sure to ping that issue when we add delete capability to the API.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. And yeah, feel free to reach out. And I understand if you have to run. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate it too. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Let's dive into the next couple of topics we have.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is ideas around accessing resources. This is an idea that's been going around for a while. We've been trying to kind of determine what interactions look like and with the API and how we get resources out and how we don't overload APIs when we don't have access to things, but still maintain our ability to reflect things in real time, or as best as, not real time, but, Kubernetes real time. And so there's two libraries, or not libraries, there's two proof of concept repositories that one was one that I was working on around SubjectAccess. Another one was one that Brian was working on around like just how the client cube, it's called client cube, but how we interact with a client, how we have a client that interacts with the cluster. And so we're working through those two repos and working through some various ideas around what the current API supports around like backoffs and what you can find out through subject access rules and what you can't find out, and kind of just like general RBAC information within the cluster. So I think I have enough now where I'm going to be drafting up a proposal that will end up as a PR for people to review and have questions about, and we'll have like a formal document to kind of review some of this and decide what maybe the best approach is. But the general idea around it will be to take our existing has access checks, which are, I would say, slightly, they're done like when I did them wrong. Like they were a band-aid to a problem, and they fixed that problem that was directly in front of us, which was we spam the cluster when we don't have access to something. But they didn't really they're not like an actual solution to this problem. So so the existing has access checks would essentially go away and be replaced by what's going to be in this proposal. And what's going to be in this proposal is really an idea about finding out what access we have at startup or login time. And I talked about this a bit last week, but we have a little bit more clarity now. So finding what we have access to as best we can at startup/login time. Then taking that information and with our memory store and using it so that we avoid an entire class of calls when we just don't have access to a thing. We can then use that same call that checked what we had access to periodically throughout Octant's lifecycle to see what we may have gained or lost access to as we're interacting with the cluster. And then the other part of that is we can use actual responses from API calls, take those error codes and inspect them for specific types of access errors, and record those alongside our kind of list of permissions, so that as you're actually navigating a cluster, if your permission has changed and the client has a new set of access and we haven't run our refresh yet, we can update those entries in real time and notify, upon receiving those errors, we can notify a user that their access has changed. And now there's another issue in Octant that was opened quite a while ago. I can't remember the exact number, but it was specific around being able to list and show what you had access to in a cluster. Part of this proposal will include the interfaces that will use to implement the viewing of what resources you have access to in a cluster. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be coming soon. I want to have the proposal PR up by the end of the week. And for those who don't know how proposals work, we have a document in our repo that talks about them, but essentially it is the proposals are where we go and we have our longer form discussion around the current implementation, where it lacks, the new presented implementation, and an implementation strategy around how we plan to execute this proposal once it gets approved. So, and that process can take, sometimes it goes quickly for shorter ones, sometimes it can take a week or two for longer ones, but my goal is to have the actual draft of this up by the end of the week. So any questions, thoughts on that? Cool. So moving on to in-cluster challenges. This is just something I wanted to bring up for everyone to think about. Deploying Octant in cluster is something that many folks want. It's something that ultimately we want to do. There's a branch with a proposal that has a file that says in cluster proposal. that's all that's in it. Well, that's as far so there's a lot of challenges to getting Octant running in cluster. The way we currently create clients and do watches and informers doesn't work when we can't create these set of informers per user for every single user that logs into Octant. Currently, the client itself is global. So when you start Octant, it consumes a kubeconfig, generates a client, sticks that into a struct, and passes that everywhere. And so it's one client for one Octant. So that issue has to get resolved. And then plugins, which are currently global, which I touched on a little bit earlier when we were going through some of the ideas around plugins. So that is, I just wanted to bring those up as things for people to think about, as things that I'm thinking about as we move towards getting Octant running in cluster. I think we're still a ways from that happening, but we can slowly start to address some of those things that do make it a challenge. Yeah, anything else there that I may have forgot to list to think about, or comments people have on that one?
Yeah, Wayne, I have two comments.
Yep.
So the first one is I'm looking at the roadmap right now, and we haven't updated that in almost a year now.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these items are starting to drift a lot from what's on the roadmap. And the cool part is we actually hit a lot of the targets from the original roadmap. So I was wondering, at what point do we, so we should probably update the roadmap, and at what point do we call it Octant 1.0?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think updating the roadmap now is a good idea. I think we can create an issue, open an issue for that, and we can just draft up a new roadmap, and as a group we can kind of remove some of the items that, well, I don't want to remove anything because we, like you said, we've achieved some, I want to leave them on there, but I think it's important to make sure that that's up to date. There is some, I agree with you, there's some drift. I think that there is also a lot of, I think the current roadmap has a lot of things that were kind of, like there's some things that are not really well defined, but they're on there, right? Like, or they're very generic, right? Like speeding up Octant. I'm looking at it now, but like speeding up Octant. Okay, well, what is that? Yeah, yes, we always want to do that, right? Like, yes, and I think things like that we can probably shift out of there. And probably make a better, more well-defined roadmap around where Octant is now. So I think that's good to call that out. And then what is Octant 1.0? I think there are two things that need to happen before we call it Octant 1.0. I think one is really nailing down the plugin experience. We're still like, that API before 1.0 needs to be, ready and pinned. And I think that having a better, the resource viewer stuff that Milan is working on, I think that's an important part of 1.0. And making sure that we are exposing all of the right information with like open API and making things a little bit more actionable. So I think we're not, I think we're still a ways away from 1.0. And I think updating the roadmap can help reflect where we need to be going to get there. So yeah, that's it.
I was also thinking maybe running as a standalone app outside the browser. That would probably be good to have for 1.0. Yeah,
I was trying to think of things that weren't on the, I think that's on the roadmap already.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. So actually, I think all the things I said are on the roadmap. Updating it to kind of account for some of the drift, and maybe just rewording some of it so that it's clear what some of those things mean and how they align with the actions we're taking now. I think it's a great idea. So I'm gonna create an issue for that right after we're done here.
Any other questions, comments?
All right, now onto the best part.
Demo
from Sam.
Cool, that'll be me. Let me share that screen. All right, let me see. Can y'all see the screen reasonably? Hopefully fonts look okay. Cool, so we had a long-standing issue about starting Octant without a kubeconfig, because currently right now, if you try to start Octant and if you don't have a kubeconfig in your .cube directory or have set something in your kubeconfig, Octant wouldn't start. In this case, it would be expected to start. And I've already pre-built most of this stuff, and I know we're running over time, so I'll keep this short. But essentially, we've shifted the internals such that, let's say I change and I move this .cube directory to like, I don't know, .cube tests, or to say .cube to .cube, something that something that client Go won't know where to look for. So in this case, I've already pre-built this binary. And what will happen is if we start Octant, it'll sit on this loading state for a little while, and it'll open a modal, and it'll actually just hang out here for a little bit until you can manually put in a kubeconfig. In this case, I already came prepared with a magical, oops, that is not the magical kubeconfig I wanted. But let's say I'm going to take my kubeconfig and paste it in here. So now you have this kubeconfig for kind. And if you hit upload, it'll actually boot all of the managers, and it'll flicker. And uh-oh, that is not good. Did the demo just flop? It might have just flopped. Oh, well, I need to rebuild the front end, but this modal should disappear. And what should end up happening is that you would actually get access to all of the stuff, and you won't need. Yeah, it is there.
It's there.
It is there, but the front end is not cooperating, or it might just be, yeah, there it is. It was probably a weird caching thing, but yeah. So this lets you have that intermediate modal state where you don't have any of this managers in the Octant internal that kind of requires the kubeconfig to all start. So just having that intermediate state is super nice, and users would now know, like, you know, they don't have to like be like, oh, I'm trying to start Octant and then nothing happens because their setup just isn't quite right. So it just makes that initial experience a little nicer, and extends for Octant to feel more like an Electron app where it'll boot up no matter what your system state looks like. That's pretty much it. There was an issue a long time ago where we proposed that Octant was going to be able to create a cluster through Cluster API, but then we decided not to do it. So this issue it's less useful than we thought it would be originally, but it's still something that I think a lot of users would find useful. And we'll probably add something like a file uploader or something so you can like browse for kubeconfig from your directory and sort of just add to the user interface aspect of it. That's pretty much it. Any questions, comments? I put up the PR. It's 991 for people who kind of want to build themselves and play around with it a little.
Excellent. Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I have a question and a comment. So the question is, there are multiple, you didn't demonstrate it, but just to make sure I understand, there are multiple ways to provide the kubeconfig currently, right? And if you set the environment variable, it will automatically detect that as well?
Yeah, so environment variable or .cube, I believe, are the two ways right now. Okay,
excellent. As well as pasting.
Yep.
And then the comment I have is that, so this is the reason we wanted this work done, even though we were not still doing the cluster creation stuff, is that imagine that this is not asking you for your kubeconfig, but this is asking you for a login, right? This is the same steps that need to happen to get us closer to working in cluster as well. So there's a lot more steps on top of this, but getting the managers detached from the process of where did that client come from is one of the first parts of that. This is great. Yeah, excellent. Please awesome. Please open an issue to add a file picker. I think that should just be an open issue right now. I don't want it to block the current PR, but just open one up because I think that'll be a great addition.
Okay, yeah, in the current PR, I actually added it as a to-do item in there, but if we can just move it to a different PR, so we can.
Yeah, I think we should, because I don't think we currently have a file picker component. And so that PR now becomes adding a file picker component, adding the Go and the TypeScript for that, and then extending the interface here to use that component. So I'd rather see all that happen in a different PR.
Sure, that's fair.
Excellent. Nicely done. Thank you. All right. Yeah, we went a little long. Sorry, folks. But actually, we didn't go long. No, this is scheduled for an hour. We got plenty of time. So thank you, everyone. If there's no more questions or anything to add, then we will call it.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you all for joining today. Have a fantastic rest of the week, everyone. See you all next week.